Hello, I'm Heather Markham. I'm with Prosper Your Home, and today I want to share my full story. I want to tell you all about why I got into this to begin with, what makes me who I am, and what it is that I'm all about. Because I am here to help families to get from dysfunction to functionality, to go from scarcity to prosperity, to heal the home at the very most fundamental level. Ultimately, I'm faith based and I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints. Now, I know that there's all of you out there who might be following me are from different backgrounds, different religions, or maybe don't believe in a particular religion at all. That's fine. But I want you to understand where it is that I am coming from so you get where my brain has been this whole time and how I got here and why it is so important to me and why I think it really matters. And also, I think you'll find it a little bit refreshing because members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints, we believe a lot of amazing things that led us to lead us basically to finding paths that fall in line with our beliefs, which are quite vast, which is why we're very big on loving and supporting people of all different faiths and all different backgrounds. I'm going to read you the article of faith number 13. We have a list of beliefs that we have. This is the number 13. Okay, this is our last one. And this one states that we believe in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous, and in doing good to all men. Indeed, we may say that we follow the admonition of Paul. We believe all things. We hope all things. We have endured many things and hope to be able to endure all things. If there is anything virtuous, lovely, or of good report or praiseworthy, we seek after these things. Now, ultimately, I got into this to help people. I got into this because my life was a huge mess and I went through a series of a lot of contrast, a lot of struggle and effort, a lot of schooling to learn how the brain works, how behavior works, why people are so dysfunctional, how trauma works, and how to overcome it because we're in a sick world. We're have you noticed just how hard it is to go through all of these troubles, the adversity, that this life of challenge and feel like, how do we just make it through? I wanted to be a therapist ultimately. And I'm going to go through a little bit of my history to get you to, where I started and how I got there. So, ultimately, I'm a researcher of brain and behavior. I love neuroscience. But as I began to study neuroscience, I realized, and the brain, I've learned there was other pieces that were missing. I loved psychology. I got into school for psychology because I was trying to deal with all of the psychotic people in my life, and I wanted to understand them and how to get over some of my own PTSD and my own trauma and the stuff that was going on in my life. And so that was the thing that made sense, was learn psychology. But because of many of the experiences I had with six of my own different therapists, I became a little bit disillusioned with it because I realized that it wasn't giving me the answers that I was hoping for. I wasn't getting that peace. I wasn't getting over the PTSD. And so I ended up praying, which led me to energy healing. Now, I want to back up and tell you a little bit about how this whole thing got started. So, some people who are a little bit leery of energy work, I want you to understand there's a reason why members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are totally enamored with it and going to it by the thousands, tens of thousands, because it really does have a lot of the piece of that article of faith, praiseworthy, good report. We're basically seeking for things that that edify one another and that bring a level of love and healing to the world and help us to let our light so shine. And this is something that I've absolutely been in love with ever since I have discovered what it's capable of doing and how it works hand in hand with both the brain and behavior as well as our spiritual side and scripturally. So, what happened to be getting me here to begin with? I was born to a mother who had psychosis. She was bipolar with number one with psychosis. Now I believe firmly that a lot of mental health issues comes from unresolved trauma. I learned that as well in the mental health field, is that most people who do go through a lot of things, there sometimes is a little bit of a genetic predisposition, but we also have a lot of trauma that affects that, that causes that in people. That it's something that sparks that trigger for it to suddenly manifest. And for my mother, she was molested by her music teacher as a small child, well, young girl. And when she came to her mother to tell her what happened, it wasn't very pretty. Her mom actually dismissed it and brushed it under the rug and also began to blame her, basically stating that a man will only go so far as you allow him to. And my mom was heartbroken. She didn't know what to do. She wasn't able to process this. The one place where she felt that she should have gone for safety wasn't safe. And beyond that, her mom was also struggling with her own stress. She had been raised by her grandparents. Her mother had passed away. I think it was a sickness or something, and so she and her sister were raised by their grandparents, and so she was very old fashioned. And I love my grandma. She was an amazing woman who had a lot of knowledge, a lot of great poetry, a lot of good memories. She was an artist, but she a lot of that backwards era, anything that had to do with sexuality and that human part of us, that natural man stuff, was very taboo. And she was kind of the belief, that we are not capable of earning our or being able to have salvation, that we shouldn't be feeling like we are capable of getting to the celestial kingdom, if you will. Okay. Which is basically the highest degree of heaven in Latter-day Saint doctrine, which corresponds with the Corinthians and how Paul was talking about the 3 degrees of glory in the heavens there are many mansions. So it does talk about that in the Bible. We can get into stuff another time, but for now, so what happened with my mom, as she was trying to discuss and her issues with her mother, it was dismissed. And because of that, it kind of caused this disconnect in her own brain. And what I found is that a lot of people who go through trauma of this nature, if they don't get a way to process and resolve this, it can manifest in either some sort of psychosis or depression, anxiety, or even a dissociation of some form. And with her, it was very hard. When she got married, she wasn't ready for what to expect. She was kind of in love with the idea of love itself, is how she told me, and her mom didn't really want to tell her anything about intimacy until the night of the wedding. And my mom at that point had already had a lot of bad experiences and a lot of people that told her things in a way that she didn't want to know it, and she didn't feel comfortable about it, and she felt that intimacy was very much of a violation, and she took pretty much all of their relationship as he was taking all, she wasn't enjoying any of it, and she felt that she was being abused. And so she decided to take me. They went through a really nasty divorce, and I believe my father was actually awarded custody, and he was able to get her a diagnosis of schizophrenia at the time, and she ended up evading, taking me, and running from the state. And my dad could not find her. She used my social security number. She went into hiding. Her family members helped her, and my dad looked for me for pretty much all the rest of my life until 18, when I finally met him again. So throughout my life, I dealt with my mother and her ups and downs, her mood disorders, her psychosis, her extremes in depression versus manic phases. And I didn't know really what was going on. I didn't quite grasp that my mother really had a mental health problem until I was older and actually learned a little bit more about mental health. All I knew was that my life was depressing, and I felt like a wounded child and this victim all the time, and I was very sullen and sulky. And my mom wanted to commit suicide just about every year throughout, as long as I can remember, through my life living with her. and she was often in and out of mental institutions. She did remarry to a man who didn't know how to handle her situation. He tried, he really tried. But he also, in his state of trying to figure out how to deal with her, became very reactive and lashed out and was often very aggressive and even assaulted us on occasion. And because of that, she sought out help and we ended up in a battered women's home for a few weeks. So, my life just kept going a little, crazy all the time. Throughout this period of time, though, we, because of the situation, my stepfather and my mother decided to seek out counseling, and they found a therapist in Colorado when we lived there. I was also dealing with bullying at the time too, because being one of the only members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the only Mormon in Colorado, there were, I think, maybe 2 other members in the whole entire elementary school. And so that was another thing I had to deal with. But anyhow, we went to this family therapist, and he kind of took me under his wing and helped me. He helped all of us. He gave a lot of really great advice. And this man was very profoundly spiritually gifted. To the point that he didn't even know how powerful his gifts were. I would state that this man was verging on the edge of basically clairvoyant gifts and many other special energetic and spiritual gifts that, for instance, he tried to describe what he was seeing in my mom, and as she was struggling with her psychosis and some of her issues and the connection problems we were having, and he could see light around her, and dim light, and he could describe it and explain it. He could also connect with spirits that were beyond the veil and help us to know who was present for our family therapy sessions, which I thought was totally fascinating. He taught me a lot about the spiritual realm, the things that he had learned. He was a very gifted man, member of the church as well, and he was a bishop. He was an institute teacher, and we didn't mean to, but we followed him from state to state. So he moved to Idaho about the time that my stepfather, lost his job and moved to Idaho Falls. He went there to work at the institute at Rick's College at the time, and we ended up seeking him out. And so he was basically throughout my entire life very, very significant mentor of mine. And because of his teaching and his guidance, I found a little bit of my purpose and who I was supposed to be. He also gave me blessings. Now, I want to talk a little bit about blessings for those of you who don't understand. So, in our church, men are given the power of the priesthood, and it is a special ability to be able to laying of hands on the head and to hear and receive counsel from God directly to us, usually for comfort or for healing, for alleviating suffering of some form. And this man had amazing gift of such a spiritual gift of almost prophecy. And he was able to see a little bit into my future and tell me a little bit about what I was to expect. Now, we also have in our church something called patriarchal blessing. Patriarchal blessing, the best word that I could use for that would be equivalent of an oracle. Okay, it's basically a patriarch who is given the calling to be able to, again, lay his hands on your head and pronounce upon you a special blessing about your future, your lineage in the line of the family of Abraham, as well as many words of advice and counsel, things that you should look for in your future that you might need to be aware of, cautions, warnings, a little bit about your spiritual gifts and what you're capable of, what you should be, hoping to achieve in your life, whether this life or again in the life beyond after we pass on. And so they're very, very fascinating. And it's so amazing to see. We can actually go through and see all of the patriarchal blessings of our ancestors as they have been deceased, so that you can actually see what was written to them, because sometimes some of that actually can apply to future generations. And it's really cool, because so much of this is just as you are fulfilling your covenants and keeping the commandments, it's fulfilled, and you can see how it happened out, in your life, and just it's like, wow, this just makes absolute sense. Later on in my life, I also found how astrology, and yes, I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, and I do believe in astrology, um, light filled astrology, particularly because I believe that God has created the earth and the heavens, and that there are signs and wonders that proclaim His name and can help guide us as a, to know a little bit about what we should expect. And I believe that there are actually certain texts and certain scriptures in the Bible that are actually dates when it's talking about certain things, and a whole nother story that we can talk about later. But I began following LDS astrologers, learning about how they fall right in line with patriarchal blessings. So fascinating when you get really into the deep nuances of it. There are so many more layers to your personal natal chart as it pertains to who you are, where you're going, what your trials and adversity may be, and how your communication, how all of these things will be affecting you throughout your life. So they go hand in hand. And this is something that I'm hoping very soon to get a certification for, so I can help my clients with as well. In the meantime, I'm working on the things that I know. And so this is what we're going to go with for now. Now, okay, so dealt with this, had this amazing blessing with my therapist. Okay. He basically gave me a blessing that one day, this one was burned into my brain. I cannot forget these words if I tried to. But he told me that one day I would be able to find a way to break the chains of abuse, not only for future generations, but also for past. That was vastly important to me because I was dealing with the junk. Oh, hold on a second. Alexa, stop. Okay, sorry. Interruption. So it was vastly important for me to understand about where I was going to be because I didn't know yet just how bad it was going to get. So my life, up to that point was pretty much of a struggle, dealing with my mom and all, but it got worse. Okay. So before it got worse, it got better. Okay. My mom did get a divorce. We moved to Utah. It was a pretty nasty divorce. It was hard. We lived with my grandma for a little while. Funny thing, Burnell moved to Utah so that he could go teach at the Sandy Institute, and we followed him there. I didn't follow him there, but he became the family therapist again as I was struggling with my mom. I knew that he had moved down there, so I sought him out again, trying to help me with this. And some of my later stuff that he taught me really helped set that foundation because I began to realize, some of his gifts and some of the things that he taught me a little bit about my purpose, walking me through meditations of understanding that my purpose was to love. And I basically took a little bit of what he taught me, the blessings that he gave me, as well as my patriarchal blessing, and kind of used it as a bit of a roadmap to help me throughout my life because it was so huge. Because I knew that in some way I was supposed to lead and guide people. Specifically, my patriarchal blessing told me that I had a gift of leadership ability, and I was supposed to redevelop that gift, and that I would be able to one day that I'd be able to, my ability to explain and teach would be substantial, which I have been working on because I feel like Moses. I've got a little bit of auditory processing disorder, so just in case things get a little bit weird, I have ADHD, and I start going in circles. I'm trying to work on that myself right now as well. Got a little bit of brain integration that I'm working on. But I knew that I needed to take everything that I've learned and help people in a bigger way because I couldn't have gone through this trauma that I'd gone through without it meaning something. So there was the trauma from the childhood, but then I came to live with my uncle for a little period of time. My uncle was amazing. I loved it there. My uncle, my aunt Valerie, and my uncle Dave. He had 11 children. He was the top at that time, the top distributor in Nikan, and he was a real rags to riches story. But he was also, oh my gosh, he has been so instrumental in teaching me what a functional family looks like. That is important because I needed to see the contrast of both worlds. I needed to see just how hard it could get, and I needed to see just how good it could get because I needed to see what was possible and that hope is real and that it is absolutely perfectly possible for any family to thrive. In this world, the family is under attack. We're struggling. It's the fundamental unit of society, and yet it's hanging on by a thread. And so many of us are struggling with our childhood memories of trauma and pain, and we don't want to give that up. It turns into an addictive reaction. And these chains of abuse keep passing down from father to son, mother to daughter, and on and on and on. If we don't get this under control to the point where we rein in the natural man tendency to fall prey to what's comfortable and the neural processes of the epigenetic coding that we put into our brain and pass down to our children through both our generational DNA as well as our actions that keep getting reinforced and repeated time and time again, we gotta change it. We've got to get to a place where the family unit is a place of safety and sanctuary and not a place of suffering and strife. The home should be a place of protection and peace. And that is where fundamentally we learn everything. So I am on a mission to heal that. And the next part of my life is important because I went from incredible peace with my uncle to living on my own for a little bit and trying to get to the point where I could create that family that I knew was promised in my patriarchal blessing. I knew it was going to happen. I'd been told little future bits about what my husband was going to be like. I'd been told where I would find him, that I'd find him in my church activities. So I was kind of on the lookout. And I knew that this man was going to be somebody who was going to be part of my my eternal existence, and that we were going to do some good things together to help people. And I knew that this was supposed to happen, but I didn't know where to find him. So I began, of course, going to church activities. I found a guy who I figured must fit the bill. Turned out, though, that he was a heroin addict as well as a porn addict. And, you know, he explained a little bit of his story, little bit by little bit, began to reveal it. And it was very hard to hear. And I began to learn a little bit about just how addiction works. And he talked about, as he relapsed and went back onto heroin, just how hard it was for him to get out of that state and get healing. And so understanding that, I reached out to a family friend who was also a friend of my uncle's, who had actually taken my sister in. And through the goodness of her heart, bless her, she thought that it would be important for her to take me against my will into her home and keep me away from this guy that I was engaged to and help me change my life and become this person that she thought I should be. Took away my agency. She also seemed to be battling some kind of psychosis as well. She began thinking that she was seeing demons in me, and she had a lot of terrifying ideologies and beliefs, and I didn't know what to do. I was stuck. She'd taken away everything. She actually severed ties with all of my family relationships by telling them I didn't want to have anything to do with them. She took everything from my mom, who was crazy, and decided to amplify that. And basically, she told people that I beat myself because it got to the point where I was so black and blue from being hit. I was often locked up. I was fed things that were not natural. And I basically had to sit like a dog and eat it. If I didn't, I would get beat. And if I threw up, I even had to eat my puke. It got to the point where I was partially blinded in one eye from being hit with a log. My nose was broken. I've got deformities on, different scars in my body. I won't go into a ton and more of detail than that, but suffice it to say, this woman really was struggling with her mental health and her ability to process her anger, which she inherited from the struggles that she had gotten from her mother, who had gotten into a lot of harsh treatment, as well as witchcraft, as well as abuse and promiscuity. She would bring men home who would abuse this her daughter, and just a lot of trauma, and it just kept perpetuating. And so I understood where she was coming from and why she was doing what she was doing, but I'm like, how could this woman just, continue this on and beat me like this and hurt me like this? And for a period of time, it got to the point where I actually almost started to lose faith in everything. I couldn't believe that I could possibly be in this situation, that God could have put me here, and that I was, being tortured like I was. It must all be a lie. It must all be fake, right? I was locked in the bathroom for hours on end. And in that period of time, I began to pray, and I began to remember words of my blessing and words of counsel that I'd gotten from my therapist, and began to pray and ask God, are you real? You know? And there were times where I began to get to that point where I felt that death would be better than life. Because as far as I knew, my whole family had rejected me. Nobody cared about me. Everybody assumed, I was forced to write this horrible, mean letter, basically writing them all off, saying that I didn't want to have anything to do with them, accusing them of terrible things. I was beaten into doing this letter. And then her son basically stood by the mailbox, preventing me from going and getting that letter. And so I had, my ties were cut from my family. They had no idea. And she burned or sold everything of mine. I had no way out. I was constantly watched by one of her children who had permission to do whatever they wanted to do to me. And so I wasn't able to go to the bathroom. The showers was the only time I could ever be, alone, or when I was locked in the bathroom. So that was really all I had. But it was around this time of September 11th. And I remember shortly before that, it's like I began to come to having those moments where they basically just locked me in the closet or the bathroom and just forgot about me. It became my only period of peace where I could actually pray, like, God, why are you really there? Or do I just forget about it all? Because I had no idea. I had no idea anymore. But it got to the point where I began to come to. And after September 11th, again, because this family is big into prepping and big into the end of the world, you know, um, extreme beliefs, they figured this was it. This was the end of the world. It was coming. It was finally here. And so they were having their family councils while I was usually locked in the bathroom. But there was one time where I wasn't. And I'd actually had started packing and putting things away in a special place in the garage. And so I was able to have my little stash of my getaway stuff. So this particular day came, I grabbed my stuff and I ran for it. And it just so happened, this was the third move that I'd had when I lived with them. We had moved into the main part of town, which actually was helpful because I was able to get away and get to the nearest hotel. The one that was willing to take me. I basically went begging for a room. I used to clean hotels. One of my first jobs for a living, I actually was a hotel cleaner, and I was actually very good at it, and was often put into the leadership position, managing the whole crew team. And so, especially when the hockey team came, so I ended up asking for a room in return for cleaning this place for free. In the meantime, I called 411, got a hold of my dad, asked him, say, hey, Dad, this is Heather. I'm ready to come home and get to know you. And I was able to move in with him. He, at that time, no flights were running, and so he wired some money, Western Union, was able to get a bus ride to go meet him and go live with him. So that's what went down there. But from that point on, I was dealing with extreme PTSD. Oh, it was bad. Man, was it bad. I, because of the types of things that she did with me, that I started to believe this woman was like, had some sort of psychic abilities and that she could basically find me wherever the show. So I had claimed that she had a mafia brother who was going to come and break my legs if I ever were to tell anybody about her. And so I had all of these fears about speaking what was going on. And so anytime I had to get it out, but I didn't know who to talk to. So I would write really faintly in a journal and in pencil some of the experiences that had happened, and try to sort it through in my brain. And I would stuff it under the mattress so that she wouldn't be able to find it, even though she lived states away. It was crazy. And looking back at how I was and where my mind was, and so much that happened, trying to find myself again was really hard. And around that same time, I went to school. My dad got me to go to school. And so I decided to take psychology so I could understand all of the crazy stuff that happened in my life and make sense of it all. I did reconcile with my uncle, by the way, did get back in touch with my mother. Around that same time, I also met my future husband, which was awesome. And he was probably one of the only people that I could really have as a confidant to talk about things to without falling apart. There were times where just talking about my past would put me in such a state of PTSD. I was no longer present. I would run red lights. Driving was actually pretty not safe. I was to that point. When I was in the middle of the memory, I remember one time I actually put the gear into reverse while I was on the freeway. My PTSD got really bad. It got really bad to the point once I had started having children, I couldn't deal with the sight of them getting hurt and bleeding. I couldn't deal with them in pain. I couldn't watch a movie without going through a panic attack where somebody was getting beaten or attacked or there was violence of any sort. I couldn't feel like a normal human being. It was hard. And so for me, trying to find the answers to healing was vastly important because I was not functioning. When I tried to share my story, like when in some of my psychology classes, where we would do like our group therapy session practice stuff, we would talk about things, I would go into a full blown panic attack after talking a little bit about it. And it wasn't okay. So I began to seek out my own therapists. And some of them had some good things to say, but there were some that really had no idea how to work with me. They didn't have any clue. I really, really respected some of my therapy teachers. They were incredible at teaching me how to work with people and what to expect and what was going on behind the scenes. I wish, sometimes I wish that maybe my teachers could have been the actual therapist and see maybe it would have gone down a little bit different. But in traditional therapy, when I went to a therapist, most of the time it was somebody who really had no experience with trauma of this sort. They really didn't know what they were doing or what we did do. Like I did do EMDR and that was helpful. It just wasn't really getting the heart of what was wrong with me. And so I didn't know how to get out of this state of panic and pain and frustration. And I was just praying, God, there has to be a way. And I remember once bearing my testimony in church. There was a woman that came up afterward. And I basically bore my testimony sharing a little bit that I'd gone through some traumatic experiences, but that I knew that one day, the Savior would atone for me and he would take away my pain. I knew it was possible. And I just assumed it was going to be once I died at the end of my life. When I got to the other side into heaven and all of this life trauma would finally be gone and I would be okay. But this woman came up to me and she said, I testify to you. She says that one day you will be able to find peace and you'll be able to look back on your past without pain in this life. And that just got to me. How? you know? And she had gotten to that point. Like, there has to be a way. And I just pray, like, God, there has to be something that you know that I don't know. Because the psychology stuff isn't working for me. I am understanding neuroscience more. I understand how the brain works and why it works, but I don't know how to get over it yet. And here's what happened. Okay? So during one of my panic attacks, this happened to be a day when I was pregnant with my third daughter. My second daughter, little, she was like not even quite a year and a half. Okay. And she was digging in the garbage. She found a light bulb that was broken in the garbage and she cut herself and she began to take her bloody hand and wipe it all over the walls. Ugh. It was disgusting. Now, what happened again, like I told you, when I was really dealing with panic attacks, I would be rocking on the floor in fetal position, or I would be curling up on my bed crying sometimes. I would basically have to hand my child over to my husband and say, "Here, you take care of her. I can't touch it." I remember when my daughter fell, and hurt herself on the dishwasher and she bonked her lip and it was just bleeding, and I was panicking. So just, little things like that. I couldn't be a normal mom. And so I called my cousin because it just so happened that my husband had a friend over, and I didn't want to have this episode in front of this friend who was over at my house. And so I called my cousin begging for help. What do I do? I need to calm down. I need to get myself in a place where I'm okay. And she told me about a man by the name of Dr. Bradley Nelson, who was in our NECAN downline, my uncle's downline, who was a chiropractor and had been blessed with he'd been blessed with a download of understanding about a way to help release trapped emotions within the body using a series of muscle testing, asking the subconscious questions, and releasing it with a magnet of all things down the what we call the governing meridian. And so she was on the phone with me. She had the book. It was the first copy that, he'd sent out. First stage. It was like really back in like 2007 or 2008. It was right when it came out. And so over the phone, she was able to release some of the trapped emotions that I was struggling with. And for the first time, I felt free. PTSD was gone. And I never again struggled with dealing with that excruciating PTSD rocking pain when my kids got hurt. I could deal with it. I could be fine. And I was just like, what is this? And my brain went back to that blessing that I had, where Bernal had told me that one day I would be able to find a way to break the chains of abuse, not only for the future generations, but also for the past. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because one thing that Dr. Nelson talked about as he was working with people all over, he would go to some of these seminars. He would take people up on stage and he would work through emotions with them and show demonstrations, and then they would be okay. There's a woman in the audience at one of these that happened to have the gift of being able to see spirits and to feel and sense them. And as she was there, she began to notice that as people were releasing the inherited emotions that they had inherited from, their previous generations, that spirit would show up and was nodding and acknowledging and in gratitude thanking them for releasing it, because once it was released from them, it also was released from the past generations as well. And it would go as it was passed down. Now, if you know anything about epigenetics, this is the interesting thing. Have you ever heard of the mouse study, where the mice who have basically gone through a traumatic series of events, where they basically would shock the mice when it's around cherry blossoms, and it would make it so that the mouse was terrified of cherry blossoms after being shocked by this every time the cherry blossom was present. Just so happened that 4 generations later, that fourth generation, anytime a cherry blossom was presented to him in his cage, he would still go into panic mode. And that was basically what epigenetics. But they've also discovered that there is the coding of all of this trauma gets passed down, but there's actually a way to undo it as well through different types of neuroplasticity, and what I also feel is types of energy work. Anyhow, that blessing that I was given, I knew this was big. I basically prayed to God, God, is this what you were talking about when Bernal told me that one day I would be able to break the chains of abuse, not only for future generations, but also for past? And I got an absolute, clear as a whistle, strongest feeling, just like the time when I asked if the Book of Mormon was true, head to toe, warmth, comfort, peace, everything. This is true. I knew I was onto something. I knew that this was part of what I needed to do, part of what I needed to do to heal me. But I also realized that because of the things that I had been told, I was also supposed to help other people. And I needed to bring this to as many people as I possibly could. But I wasn't ready to be comfortable with helping myself yet. I was still too nervous too struggling with the belief that I could muscle test, that I wasn't getting it right. I was too much of a perfectionist. I had to get it perfect. I had to know absolutely whether or not I was absolutely on target and exact. And so for me to muscle test on myself and know for sure if I was getting it right was the big hang up I was having. That's what a lot of people have when they get involved with energy work or the emotion code to begin with is, that trust in yourself of knowing whether or not you're muscle testing correctly. And so I would come to my husband, who I felt was a better muscle tester than I was, but he was like, "Oh, this is too woo woo. I don't know if I want to get into this." At the time, he was a little bit uncomfortable with the whole thing, but I knew that I needed to do this and I needed to work on myself because it was the only way I could find peace because it worked so well with the one thing. I still had all this other PTSD that I had to work through. I had lots of depression and anxiety and all those other struggles. And so I just knew I needed to chisel at it piece by piece. But I couldn't bring myself to muscle test. So I just put the book on the shelf and just kept learning. I went back to school. I had 6 kids in between all of this time. So I kept going to school and then taking a break and having another kid and going back to school and taking a break and having another kid. So it was a long process. And a lot of times I would end up having to retake classes just to refresh my memory. Again, I'm dealing with ADHD, a lot of trauma, a little bit of auditory processing disorder to where I was not able to remember things clearly and jumbling things up. Occasionally I've noticed it comes out in some of my videos. So I'm sorry if it happens, but this is just the way that it works, okay? My brain happens to have 30 things going on and I have to try to fit it in and come back to it somewhere. So hopefully if I do get off track, I'll come back to it. But there's a point to it. Okay, so here we are. I knew that I needed to bring this to the world. I knew that I needed to heal myself. And I firmly believed that God had inspired Dr. Nelson because of the way that he shared his story. It was absolutely given to him by the Spirit. He knew it. His whole entire life had been planned impeccably for what it was that he was supposed to learn, piece by piece, line upon line. Everything was added to where it present the perfect recipe for him to become what he needed to become, to help who he needed to help. The software background that he had that helped him to create the body code, all of this stuff that just became part of who he needed to be. Now, he wasn't the only one. I also began to study other intuitives, other people who had learned different things. There was, Carol Tuttle, for instance, and her, the Remembering Wholeness book that I found that was absolutely life altering, helped me to understand what I had actually known a little bit and what Burnell had taught me, understanding that we choose our trials. Now, if you've studied near-death experiences, this will also be something you'll be able to relate to as well, because a lot of near-death experience people have come back and talked about how we choose our trials, we choose our adversities. And in counsel, before we come to earth, we get to pick a lot of the junk that we're going to go through because it's going to develop us and help us to build our light, have an interesting sort of spiritual education of experience. And then we have the opportunity to either help edify other and strengthen other people through that and love other people, or just move on to our next level. But I knew that for me, what I'd gone through, I needed to experience so that I could help people through their junk. Now, I know that not everybody is going to have as traumatic of an experience as me. And sometimes it feels like when I start sharing my story, some people have a kind of total disconnect. Like, whoa, you went through this really, really weird, horrendous situation. I've never, had anything that bad. And sometimes I've met people who even had it worse than I did. I've worked with some clients who did, and how? It's like I was there for about 2.5 years, and that was horrible. But other people had lived their almost whole life in basically a prison situation where they couldn't get out, and constantly, going through horrible types of abuse of every form. And just the idea that life can get that hard, and to find a way to where you can create your own home that is peaceful, that is prosperous. Because something that I've learned is people who go through trauma of this magnitude tend to fall victim to scarcity mentality and lack, and the inability to get themselves out of peace. They don't prosper, and they tend to pass down that victimhood, the wounded childness, the ineffectiveness, the scarcity mentality, The fear, the anger, the reactivity, all of that gets passed down to their future generations. And if you take a look at, those who are on welfare, oftentimes they'll ask you questions about your history, because a lot of times they've kind of known that, what starts from, your generations, your mother father situation will get passed down to the children. And these things go in generations. Why? Because the trauma is still there and it codes itself onto the DNA and it gets passed down epigenetically, energetically. I found a way to get out of it and to break it. Different modalities have the ability to break this cycle. The emotion code was one of them. And I worked to get certified in that. And that was vastly fascinating because as I was working with clients, I worked with actually quite a lot more than what he had actually asked to. I worked for over 80 clients at that period of time. As I was working with people, I began noticing I was getting this sixth sense with people. And I was able to sense what I began to learn about chakras, which is basically the energy system within the body that helps, I believe, is a processing mechanism for that particular aspect of your life. So there's 7 main chakras, there's 12 total if you're including the etheric chakras. Then we all body organs also have chakras. I'm going to have an entire little presentation webinar or something that I'm going to do on chakras, so don't worry about that now. But understanding that it's just basically your energetic anatomy that helps you to process emotions. It stores emotions and tends to absorb stuff into it. And so when you're not functioning, a lot of times those trapped emotions will be going there, as well as different organs and glands and tissues of the body. And so there is a way to help clear that. And I believe very firmly that God knows this and he has been inspiring and instructing people on great methodologies to be able to help people release these chains and help people get out of this pain. Again, because as a Christian and as a believer in Jesus Christ, we believe he's coming back. We believe that period of the millennium when he returns, 1,000 years of peace, is going to be coming shortly. Even if you are not Christian, even if you happen to believe another religion or something else, I'm telling you, the world is knowing about this up level that the world is supposed to be going through. This millennium, this era of peace, it's in Hinduism, it's in Buddhism, it's in all of the different Eastern religions, as well as the other, different types of religions. This period of time that we're waiting for. So many cultures know about. It's not hidden news because it's real, it's true. It's going to be happening. But in order to get to that state, we need to do some work. We need to be ready. We need to up-level the world as well as our homes and our state of being so that we are prepared. Because Zion isn't going to build itself without us. Okay? In order to be at peace, in order to have the law of consecration, you know, we need to be whole. We need to be healed. So, okay, next phase. As I basically went through the next decade learning and absorbing. So the psychology part was all part of that. And I kept going back to learning more neuroscience, which I absolutely love. Some of my very favorites, Dr. Carolyn Leaf, Joe Dispenza, Jim Quick, some of the people that have studied the brain and studied the possibilities of the neuroscience and how neuroplasticity is a thing and how it can evolve and change. Our brains are totally capable of learning how to create new dendrites and eliminate the old patterns in the brain. But something that really hit me that was really cool is I went to one of my energy healing conferences and I found a coach that I feel very much that I was called to find. His name is Tyler Watson, and he created something called the abundance alignment technique. As a member of the church as well, he had gone through his own series of trials and struggles and trying to figure out how he could resolve his issues that he'd had, and gone through situation of overcoming pornography and starting in his early marriage trying to get over issues that he had of being able to be prosperous and abundant himself with his wife. And he decided to pray about how to help his wife with some struggles that she was having with gluten, as well as her depression and other things. And he was given a download from the Lord specifically about how the body holds on to what he dubbed as a word allergies and addictions. So we understand that the natural man, in our scriptures, the natural man is an enemy to God and has been since the fall of Adam. We understand that the body is prone to things that make us comfortable, that keep us safe, that keep us in the same old situation. We have the fight or flight reaction that's going on. And so we tend to overreact, and we also tend to try to draw ourselves to that thing that is most comfortable and safe feeling, which sometimes may even be the thing that is harming us. But because we're so used to it, we keep ourselves in that cycle. And so that would be like an addiction. Okay. And so an allergy, so not that the typical psychological association word for addiction, which basically, is the harmful state that is above and beyond your ability to function normally. Where when something becomes an addiction that you cannot basically function without that thing. So, and that's a little bit different. But what we're talking about with his form of addiction, is that we're just prone to keep repeating the same patterns over and over. It just made a world of sense to me. Now, the allergy part, we tend to basically find ourselves in aversion to the things that would make us more successful. Procrastination, that would be, we're allergic to success. We're allergic to losing weight, for instance. So we can have an addiction to food, but we can also have an allergy to doing the thing that we need to do to get ourselves out of that state and taking control of the body and making it do what we want it to do. So, man, this really clicked with me. And as I began to listen to him, I'm like, this is something that I really have to do. And it just hit me. I need to study with this. I need to learn this certification process and learn how I can help people to eliminate allergies and addictions as well. And so I decided to become a certified instructor in the abundance alignment technique and become an elite performance coach through Tyler Watson's program. And it's the best thing I've ever done. Ever. Aside from being baptized. And man, well, of course, and marrying my husband, but we'll get into that too. Man, I found a new way to help people. And it took a lot of what I was learning with all of the different modalities that I had, but it amplified it times 10. And it helped me to find a way to uncover all of those cycles and the patterns that we do within ourselves, preventing us from being the kind of person that we know we can be. And so I decided, taking these things that I've learned, as well as some of the things that I knew I was supposed to learn. So then here's one more thing. Okay. Patriarchal blessing again. I was told that I needed to study home economic subjects. Now, fascinating thing about that, I could never find home and economic subjects. Whenever I went to school, there was only like maybe a couple classes even available at all. And it usually wasn't something that I was either interested in or had to do with what I was working with my schedule. I took like a cooking class, but I'm like, I'm supposed to study home economic subjects. What does this mean? I kind of feel like the patriarch was working with the verbiage that he personally could understand at the time, because he's, okay, get this, feng shui. Do you know anything about feng shui? I found out when I was living with my uncle a little bit about it, because I was learning some of the things that my uncle was teaching. He was getting into the law of attraction type of stuff. He was also learning different types of energetic modalities, because again, he was working with Nikan, which used biomagnetics and stuff for health and healing. And Japan had a much better healthcare system at the time, with a lot of the things that they did. They had a wellness care system, basically. And they were basically the number one in the World Health Organization. And I know it's not China, but I began to be fascinated by things in the Orient and things from the Eastern perspective. I even took some world religion classes and learned a little bit about the amazing processes that Buddhism and Hinduism, other things that have that are very similar to the gospel, the things that they bring that are very praiseworthy and good report that we could add to our own knowledge base. So, it was so refreshing. But when I found feng shui, it was like, this is it. This is my home economics. Because it's basically taking the home interior design and combining it with prosperity and dividing up every single aspect of your life into each corner of your home and helping you work through a process of healing yourself, your whole life, using the home as a basis for doing so. Now, with all of the trauma that I'd gone through, another thing that I was struggling with was clutter. Okay. I was trying to get my own mind in order. So clutter was something that was kind of went part and parcel with the whole package. As I was trying to just get up to a place where I finally had peace, my house was a mess. And I'd be working on myself, I'd be working with clients, and then I'd come out and the whole house was a disaster, and I'd be all blowing up again and losing myself again and getting all angry at my kids and screaming. I knew that I needed to get to a place where our home was also a state of peace and order and chaos. And I realized that the home is a reflection of what's going on in your mind. And it just kind of clicked and it hit me like almost 2 decades later. Oh my gosh. Was feng shui what they were talking about in my patriarchal blessing? Because he kind of went around the bush and was trying to explain this is a broad topic covering many fields of study, blah, blah, blah. And he was trying to, it was like he was trying to grasp for words to describe what it was that his mind was going to, what he was envisioning. And the way that I've had, Bob explain blessings to me is sometimes he's given words and sometimes he's just kind of given images that he has to try to describe using his verbiage. And I can only imagine that's how it is with the patriarch. Sometimes they're probably giving very specific things to say. But if there is no vocabulary for the word feng shui and they don't understand it, he's probably getting these images and trying to explain it to me. And so I knew that it had to do with the home. It had to do with healing. It had to do with economy and prosperity. Because one of the biggest things that we were struggling with throughout our entire marriage was the problem of prosperity. We were not getting by. We were struggling on food stamps. We were struggling on the ability to make ends meet. It goes with the territory of trauma. It just does. And there are so many people out there that I know that have been through the worst of the hard knocks and can't seem to wrap their heads around making money or keeping money or maintaining a budget or maintaining some sort of sane financial security for them for their future. And most people out there are just scrambling around trying to figure out what to do. And some people will go and they'll learn stuff, but implementing it is a whole other story. And I knew I needed to learn that too. I needed to be able to understand home economics for myself so I could manage it for myself and then teach other people. And so as I was going through all of these different parts of what I needed to do, I'm like, feng shui is it. Because it's the only thing out there that takes it all and puts it all into an entire program, exactly like I wanted to do, where you're fixing every single aspect of your life, your health, your relationships, your financial situation, all of it. And so as I combined it all together and created this map, I realized this was my curriculum. This is what I needed to do to teach the world, to help people. That people need a course that helps get them through all of the junk, find identity, find their inner self, find their state of health, find their life purpose, and get that connection that they're missing so that everything else works. They can become prosperous, they can have synchronicity in their life, and finally be of the service that they're supposed to be and fulfill their mission. And it all begins in the home. It had to happen that way. So that's my program. I decided that I've got to do it. It's time. I've got to start setting it all up and making it happen. And so I'm beginning to work things out. I've been working with clients throughout the world, for the last few years. I've got people in Nepal. I've got some people in Australia. I've had people in Brazil and Africa, everywhere. And I've helped people eliminate some of their emotional junk But I knew that deep down, it always comes back to the home. If you can't find peace with yourself and in your home, it's going to pass down. And whatever we don't heal within ourselves, we tend to create this chains, this cycle that gets passed down generation to generation to generation. And it has to stop. We need to get to that place where our purpose is bigger than our pain, to where we are no longer hurting to the point that we can't be whole. So I'm here to help you and to help anybody out there who is looking for peace and clarity, for sanctuary within their home, and to make their lives and their homes prosper, so that your relationships prosper, your marriage prospers, that your identity becomes one that is prosperous, that your mission can flourish and prosper, that everything that you're supposed to do in your life becomes clear. Because I believe that God has a plan and a purpose for each one of us. But a lot of times we can't get to that because we're so stuck within our own subconscious junk and our pain and our prison that we're dealing with. Now, I know that Christ atoned for all of us. I believe that. I know that there's other energy workers out there that they're kind of not so sure about this Christ guy. They know that he was a great prophet. Most of them, anybody who is into energy work pretty much has gotten to the place where they know that there's a universe, right? They know that there's a higher power. But me being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I knew a bigger picture. I knew the plan of salvation. I knew that there was a whole purpose that was designed, and I knew what it was. And so whether or not you believe in what I believe, I want you to have an open mind and just consider that all of this that I've been talking about has something to do with you and has something to do with your purpose. And that what if there is a plan and a purpose for you and you just need to get over your inner junk to find that person that you are supposed to be, to find that place where you and your family are supposed to get to, so that your home is finally a sanctuary. So what I'm offering is that you book a call with me and just find some clarity. Just a half an hour where we sit and talk about something that you want to work on. I'm going to give you a worksheet to kind of go through your what it is that you're wanting. And I want you to dig a little bit deeper, because it kind of seems like a very redundant worksheet, because you're going to wonder about what it is that you really want, what it is you really don't want. And I know it sounds redundant, some of these questions that it's going to be asking you, but you're digging into your subconscious and kind of getting through, okay, what is it that I'm really meaning here? What is it that I'm really trying to get at? What is it that I'm really pushing away? And what is it's pulling me, besides what my mind is telling me I should do and what my heart is telling me that I should do? Okay. So book a call with me. It's heathermarkham.org/call. Okay. And then we'll go through and see what we can work out with you. I'm going to be starting group coaching. I'm working on my curriculum. This is the early stage. If you're watching this later, it's probably up at that point. But I'm getting everything set up to where we're going to take you on a journey of healing from beginning to end, understanding your mindset, mastering detox, declutter, learning how the alignment process works, learning and understanding your identity, your roles, your principles, your values, getting to your core of who you are so that you can then move forward and get to your health. You got to heal your body in order to heal your mind. You got to work through this too. And I'm going to be working on this too, guys. I'm not perfect. There's by no means am I completely healed, but I've gotten to a place now where the PTSD is gone, where the anxiety and depression is gone, or occasionally very manageable, because I'm just going through something circumstantially. It happens. We all go through junk. Again, adversity is part of this existence. It's part of this life. And I hope to talk to you about what's going through my life, and that you can find a little bit of answers in what I'm going through, and I can help you find healing too, as I'm going through mine. So I'm going to be starting a group coaching. As far as I know, right now, that group coaching might be $37 a month. Okay. Couple times a month, we're going to be meeting. I'm going to be doing alignments, live alignments with everybody, and some live coaching. That's going to be my base. I'll work in with the rest of my packages and explain to you what that's going to be, including what it's going to go into. But it's going to basically take you through an entire series of going through each aspect of your life, using your home as a blueprint, and helping you to get rid of the allergies and addictions, all of the junk that you've been holding on to, all of the trauma, the pain, the frustration. And again, your trauma doesn't have to be like my trauma. It can be something very simple. It can be something worse. But we all go through this junk, and we all need to get to a state where we are more effective at helping one another, where we can edify and strengthen and build each other up. So, thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, like and subscribe. If you didn't, you probably won't be here still. But I'm glad that you listened this long and heard me and my story and understand a little bit more about who I am, where I'm coming from, and how I can help you get out of where you are and get onto your life purpose. All right. Thank you very much. And I hope to get to know all of you, my new friends. Have a great day.